Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Loretta Reynolds from the Campus Christian Center. I want to welcome you to the 2021 Robbins Peace Emphasis Convocation. In 1988, Earl Robbins and his wife, Sue, provided funding to establish an annual lecture series on peace and peacemaking. The couple made this choice because while attending Berea College, Earl learned that, and I quote, "What is important in life is the true humanity of us all," end quote. Since the passing of both Earl and Sue Robbins, their children have continued to support the Robbins Peace Lecture Series, and some of them are with us tonight. So Robbins family, we wish you a warm Berea College welcome. And tonight, we are so very happy to have Father Gregory Boyle with us. Father Boyle is an American Jesuit priest and the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, which is the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and reentry program in the world. He has received the California Peace Prize and been inducted to the California Hall of Fame. In 2014, the White House named Father Boyle a champion of change. He is the author of Tattoos on the Heart, Barking for the Choir, and The Whole Language, The Power of Extravagant Tenderness. And in August 2020, Homeboy Industries received the prestigious Conrad Hilton Foundation Humanitarian Award. I want to remind all of our audience that there will be a time for questions at the end of Father Boyle's presentation, so please be ready to use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. Father Boyle, if we were all in Phelps Stokes Chapel right now, you would be welcomed with a hearty round of applause. So just imagine that 1,000 college students are applauding and giving you a delightful Berea College welcome. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a privilege to be with all of you. I was telling my kind host that this morning I Googled Berea and was so heartened by reading the history of what you're about and how prophetic you are. You know, the poet Wallace Stevens says, "We live in the description of the place and not in the place itself." Most of us settle for the description of the place when we should hold out for the place itself. But I congratulate you in Berea for the prophetic stance to choose to live in the place itself, as you say, of one blood created, a place of kinship and connection. And so there is a vision that joins us together as people of faith, and we want the world to look differently than it currently looks. We want to imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And so we seek to dismantle the barriers that exclude. And we stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. We stand with those whose dignity has been denied and those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And every once in a while, we get so fortunate to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop. And we get to stand with the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. We hold out for the place itself, for a community of beloved belonging. Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we create a community of beloved belonging? where there is no us and them, there's just us. And I suspect if kinship happened to be our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice, we would be celebrating it. So all of you at Berea know what this means and to what you are all called to embrace, as you put it, your 8 great commitments. And you brace yourselves as you go stand out at the margins, because the world will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. We go to the margins and other voices get heard. Homeboy Industries was started in 1988 when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission. It was nestled in the middle of 2 public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. And it was the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other during the time I was pastor. And the Los Angeles Police Department deemed my parish the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988. And next Friday, a week from tomorrow, I will bury my 244th young person, a young man named David. So we did a lot of things in those early days. We started a school, which was the first effort, because there were so many middle school, junior high age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So they were wreaking havoc in the projects. They were writing on the walls. They were selling drugs. They were violent. And so I walked out to them and I would kind of isolate them one at a time. And I'd say, hey, you know, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, every single one of them said, yeah, you know, I would. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So that kind of forced my hand. And then right across the street from the church is the elementary school, our parochial school, grades K to 8, which occupied the first 2 floors. And the 3rd floor was the convent where the nuns lived. So I gathered all the sisters into the living room one evening and I sat them down and I said, hey, you know, would you guys mind, you know, moving out? And we could turn the convent into a school for gang members. And they looked at each other and they said, sure. And so we were off and running. And gang members came in large numbers after that to attend our school. They didn't come to church, but they came to our church property, and it led some members of the parish to sidle up to me and say, hey, you know, aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed, you know, good people in and bad people out, which I thought raised quite a gospel challenge. And then the gang members said, if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the parish, we marched around the factories that surrounded the housing projects, trying to find felony-friendly employers. And that wasn't so forthcoming. So we just started things. We started a maintenance crew, a landscaping crew, a crew to build our child care center, all made up of rival enemy gang members from the 8 gangs and the projects. And then in 1992, after the verdict, the Rodney King verdict, every pocket of poverty just ignited, except the poorest pocket, my parish. So the LA Times reporter came to interview me and asked me why I thought my parish didn't ignite. And I said, well, I don't know. I think maybe it had to do with the fact that we had 60 strategically hired gang members from the 8 different gangs who had a reason to get up in the morning and a reason not to gangbang the night before. And more to the point of your question, a reason not to torch their own community. So the article appeared, and the next morning, and I get a phone call from a movie producer named Ray Stark, who happened to have $500 million, and he summoned me to his Beverly Hills office. And he said, how do you think I should spend my money? And as I look back on it now, I see that I had woefully undershot my request. And I said, well, there's an abandoned bakery right across the street from the school. You could buy it. It's got ovens, they don't work, but you could fix them. We could put hair nets on enemy rival gang members, and I don't know, they could bake bread, and we could call it Homeboy Bakery. And he said, sure. And again, we were off and running. A month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas. Once we had plural, we changed our name from Jobs for a Future to Homeboy Industries. Not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And now nobody ever intends to do such a thing, but we have evolved our way into becoming now the largest gang intervention rehab reentry program on the planet. 15,000 folks a year wander through our doors, trying to reimagine their lives. Every single one who walks through our doors comes barricaded behind a wall of shame and disgrace. And the only thing that can climb that wall and find itself on the other side is tenderness, which is the highest form of spiritual maturity. Every gang member, man and woman, comes through our doors with what psychologists would call a disorganized attachment. Mom was either frightened or frightening, and you can't calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. The homies always say they're used to being watched, but they're not used to being seen. We want to see who they are. Like the Buddhists say, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. We want to hold the mirror up and remind them of their truth. We want to hold the mirror up and tell them that they are exactly what God had in mind when God made them. And then you watch them become that truth. You watch them as they inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. No 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's huge. But you have to reach in and you have to dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth, so that they can be held and they can be cherished. And if it's true enough that the traumatized are most likely to find their way to causing trauma, it's equally true that the cherished will be more likely to find their way to the joy there is in cherishing themselves and each other. Our goal is not surviving as the fittest, but thriving as the nurtured. But you reach in and you dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace. In the Acts of the Apostles, they have a very odd line, and it says simply, "And awe came upon everyone." And it suggests that the measure of health in any community at all, including in yours, may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. I remember years ago, I was invited to speak to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and it was what they call a gang in service, where social workers commandeer a hotel ballroom from 9 to 5, and they get credits for attending all day, keynotes and workshops and breakout sessions. So I'd done many of these before, and I said yes, figuring I'd do a keynote, and I bought my ticket. Well, a week before I was to leave, I pulled the letter out, and to my horror, I see that, in fact, I am to be the only speaker from 9 to 5 all damn day. And I remember saying to myself what the homies often say, "Oh, hell no, I'm not going to be the speaker all damn day." So I called two homies into my office, Andre and Jose, and both of them are in our 18-month training program, gang members. In fact, they were enemies, rivals. And they were like in their 9th month of the 18-month training program. And I sit them down and I said, "Look, you're flying with me to Richmond, Virginia. I'd like you to get up in front of 600 social workers and tell your stories. Take your time, because we got a long ass day to fill." Well, I had never heard their stories, and Jose gets up first, and he's like 25 years old at the time, and gang member, tattooed, been to prison, and at that juncture, I remember he was a very valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solid in his own recovery, and now he's helping younger homies and homegirls with their addiction issues. So he had a stretch in prison, but he also had a stretch as a homeless man and an even longer stretch as a heroin addict. So he gets up in front of 600 social workers and he says, "I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when my mom looked at me and said, 'Why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me.'" Well, 600 social workers audibly gasped. And then he says, "It sounds way worser in Spanish." And we got whiplash going from gasp to laugh. And then he continued, "I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage and she knocks on the door, and the guy comes to the door and she says, 'I found this kid.' And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school each day. First t-shirt because the blood would seep through, and second t-shirt, you could still see it. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could regain his speech, he said through his tears, I wore 3 t-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. But now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds? And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but only in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. For the truth of the matter is this: if we don't welcome our own wounds, we may well be tempted to despise the wounded. We are always just trying to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. And lucky for us, there are only 4 things. They're big, but they're only 4. Inclusion, nonviolence, unconditional loving kindness, compassionate acceptance. If we take those things seriously, then indeed we've taken seriously what Jesus took seriously. And we connect ourselves to the original covenant, where God says to us, as I have loved you, so must you have a special preferential love and care for the widow, orphan, and the stranger. And at the time those words were written, society looked at the widow, orphan, and stranger and said, we can live without you. But a community of beloved belonging, a community animated by tenderness, where we cherish each other, insists, we will not live without you. The great John Lewis used to say, we all live in the same house. He didn't say, some of us live on the 3rd floor and some of us live in the basement. He also doesn't make it aspirational. He doesn't say one day we will all live in the same house. He states it right out there. We all live in the same house. For the time being, we live in the description of the place, but we need to hold out for the place itself. And so we go to the margins and we look people in the eye and we say, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are. In the Christmas carol, O Holy Night, it has that one line, long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared, and the soul felt its worth. And yet it's about Jesus, and yet it's about Christmas. But how is it not the job description of every one of you in the beloved Berea community. You appear, and the soul feels its worth. You see people, and people inhabit their goodness, which is unshakable. In the old days, I would ride my bike, my black beach cruiser, all throughout the projects till late at night, kind of patrolling the little territories of each of the 8 gangs. And I can remember being in this one part of Aliso Village housing projects. And I was talking to, some 8 gang members in this darkened archway. And I looked to the left and I see this homie named Bandit, who was from their gang. And he had just run up to a car to sell crack cocaine. And so he was walking back to the group and he sees me there. And I wish I could say he was embarrassed that I was there watching him count his drug money, but he wasn't so much. He always refused to walk through the doors of Homeboy Industries until he did. And I couldn't believe my eyes. And he says to me what gang members often say, I'm tired of being tired. And so he began his 18 months with us. He learned to transform his pain so he didn't have to transmit it anymore. He excavated his wound and he came to terms with what was done to him and indeed what he had done. And he gained resilience. And he knew the truth of who he was. And the time came for him, after therapy and tattoo removal and case management and navigators coaxing him, it was time to leave us after his 18 months. And certainly now the world would throw at him what it would, but this time he wasn't going to be toppled by it. And so we found him a job, a kind of a transition from our 18 months to gainful employment. It was a warehouse job. And he worked there for like 5 years until he became like the floor manager. And another 3 years later, he became, was promoted even further. And he got married and he bought a house and he had 3 kids. And I hadn't heard from him in a while, and no news is good news. And so on a Friday afternoon, he kind of calls me with panic in his voice. And he says, gee, you gotta bless my daughter. I said, ¿Qué pasó, mijo? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital? He said, oh, no, on Sunday, my little Jessica, she's 18 years old. She's going to Humboldt College. Imagine. But she's a little tiny thing, and Humboldt's far up north, so we're afraid of her for her. And do you think you could give her a blessing before she goes? And I go, oh my gosh, I'd be honored. I said, look, tomorrow's Saturday. I have baptisms at 1. Why don't you, all come in at 12:30? We'll do a little send-off blessing. And sure enough, Bandit and his wife and the 3 kids show up at 12:30, and they're including tiny little Jessica. So I put her in the middle in front of the altar, and I said, well, let's surround her with our bodies, and everybody touch her, grab her arm, and put your hand on her shoulder. Go ahead, put your hand on her head. And I tell them to close their eyes and bow their heads. And as the homies say, I do a long ass prayer. I go on. And finally, somewhere in the middle of this prayer, I notice we've all become chillones. We're all sobbing. And I don't know exactly why we're all crying, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their families. So, you know, I wipe my eyes and we all laugh at about how mushy we got. And to change the subject, I look at tiny little Jessica and I say, hey, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? And she was very quick, forensic psychology. I go, damn, forensic psychology? And Bandit over here chimes in, yeah, she's going to study the criminal mind. And Jessica looks at her father and does one of these, you know, and he sees her and he says, yeah, I'm going to be her first subject. So we go out to the car and we give big hugs and everybody piles into the car except for Bandit. He hangs back and I'm glad he has. And I said, hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for choosing to walk in your own footsteps. I'm proud of you. And his eyes well up with tears and he says, you know what? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul felt its worth. Exactly what God had in mind. And so we choose to stand against forgetting that we belong to each other. And we seek to create a community of kinship, beloved belonging, such that God might recognize it, which has always been God's dream come true, that you may be one. And so we go to the margins and we imagine a circle of compassion, and then we imagine nobody standing outside that circle. And we dismantle the barriers that exclude, because we know that to do so is to take seriously what Jesus took seriously. And so we see people, we don't just watch them. And we remind them of their truth. Oh, nobly born. Remember who you really are. Till you appear and the soul feels its worth. We've settled for the description of the place. And we need to hold out for the place itself, community of beloved belonging. And pretty soon, as we inch our way out to the margins, we will cease to care if anyone accuses us of wasting our time there. For in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. God bless you all, and thank you very much.
Father Boyle, thank you so very much. We do have some questions, and so I may skip around a little bit, but one question is, does Homeboy Industries offer a space that is inclusive of and or supports non-Christians and non-religious people?
That's a good question. Yeah, we have lots of atheists and Christians of every description. We have Muslims, we have Buddhists, and so it's all kind of one heart, one community, one God of all, really. And so so there isn't a kind of a sense that you have to sign on to a certain creedal belief system. But we know that we're invited to, create this, as the Buddhists call it, a sangha, a place of practitioners where people learn to cherish each other. And so we want to create a certain kind of bravery in that, and a joy, which is the mark of anybody who is faithful, no matter what their belief system. As Jesus says, "My joy, yours, your joy complete." So we're hopeful that that will be the mark of who we are as a community of people. But we have all kinds, all different gangs. Everybody's working with multiple enemies, and Black, brown, Asian, white, and we're of one blood. So we want to create that place that's exquisitely mutual, where everybody receives and gives and allows their hearts to be altered by the other.
Thank you. Another question: how do we approach the stigma of the social norms of good and bad people based on how people look? How can we be a voice of change?
Well, even beyond how people look, it's even beyond the good and bad of it. I think people are healthy or they're not yet. And homies have taught me that, over 37 years, and behavior is a language, and certainly gang violence is a language of the lethal absence of hope. So you want to know, what language does behavior speak? And so I was reading the other day that kindness is the only non-delusional response to everything, And so it's a way of somehow aligning yourself to the heart of God. And but moralism hasn't really led us to be more moral. All it's done is help us strike a high moral distance. It's kept us from each other. Oddly, we've been all taught that that's not true, that it's kind of like do good and avoid evil. But oddly, it's kept us from each other. And I do believe it's God's dream come true that we be one. That we're not supposed to strike a high moral distance. We're supposed to presume that the answer to every question is compassion, because that's how our God is. I recommend a mystic who writes about mystics named Mirabai Starr. And she says, once you know the God of love, you fire all the other gods. And I think it's true. And then once you kind of notice the notice of God, behold the one beholding you and smiling, a God who isn't wagging his finger at you, the God who loves us without measure and without regret, the God who is just never disappointed in us because he's too busy loving us, the God of the prodigal son who doesn't wait for an apology but can't run to his kid fast enough and wrap his arms around him. That's the God of love. And once you know the God of love, then you start to go, yeah, we were all born wanting the same things. So whether you have tattoos on your face or not, we were all born wanting the same things. And I was born in the gang capital of the world, Los Angeles, California, but I won every imaginable lottery, the parent lottery, the mental health lottery, the education lottery, the zip code lottery, which, you know, white privilege probably has only everything to do with that. But the fact that I didn't join a gang doesn't make me morally superior to the thousands of men and women I've been privileged to know. And people talk about choice, and yet not all choices are created equal. Some people have to carry more than others. And so awe is appropriate.
Hey, how do you hold space for grief and tenderness without becoming numb to the pains and joys of being in proximity to the margins through service?
That's an excellent question. You know, if you go to the margins to make a difference, then it's about you. But if you go to the margins so that the folks at the margins make you different, then it's about us. If you're going to the margins to save lives or to fix people, then it'll be depleting. But if you go to the margins to receive people, then it's eternally replenishing. I remember I met a gang member in Houston after a talk I gave, and he was now, you know, working with gang members in the streets of Houston, and he pleaded with me and he said, how do you reach them? Meaning gang members. And I found myself saying to him, well, for starters, stop trying to reach them. Can you be reached by them? Can you allow them to alter your heart? That's what exquisite mutuality is, because you'll burn out if it's about you, but you will be eternally replenished and delighting when you insist that it be about us.
Okay, here's one about politics. Assuming you know that everything is political, including the conditions that led to the Homeboy gangs, does Homeboy Industries have a political education program for reentry?
Well, we have kind of civic advocacy. So if there are bills that will want to, you know, remove some of the obstacles to gang members and felons getting apartments rented to them, or ability to vote, or whatever it might be, we certainly advocate for that. More than anything is we endlessly have tables where people register to vote, because we want them to, you know, to roll up their sleeves and find their voice. So, you know, you know, the word political sounds like it's tinged with something, but it's really more civic. That we're civic minded and we want people to take ownership. We don't want somebody else to decide, not just about candidates, but about the direction of things, you know. And so, you know, we kind of explore issues together as a community, and not every issue feels like it's directly impactful to our population and the folks we walk with. But then again, there are a lot of things that do. So, and we try to educate constantly so that people will take this kind of thing seriously.
Right. Thank you. Oh, we have someone who is asking if you could share something about your newly announced book.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you know, I think my assistant, she ends up giving titles to talks, and this one was called The Whole Language The Power of Extravagant Tenderness, which just by coincidence is the name of my new book, now available on Amazon. But it comes in my, and I should say publicly that my editor and my agent and the publisher, they always hate my titles. And the titles always come from homies. And in the shortened version of where this title comes from was there was a gang member, everybody in his gang called him Russian Boy. And he came to this country when he was 9 from Uzbekistan with his mom. And he joined a Latino gang. And long story, they wanted to deport him. But anyway, there was a guy at my office who they were really good friends. And I was talking about him one day, and he said, yeah, Russian Boy and I, we were cellies. They shared a cell at county jail. And he goes, every night, Russian Boy would go out to the payphone and he would talk to his mom in Russian. And then he said, damn, G, he spoke the whole language, which was his version of fluent. That's what he meant by fluency, that he spoke the whole language. And so the book is a kind of about therapeutic mysticism. How do we speak the whole language? How do we see the whole person? How do we look for wholeness in each other and invite people to their own wholeness? So it's kind of a mystical view, and speaking the whole language is a kind of a mystical fluency where we align our hearts and how we live to the heart of God and to the way of Jesus. So thank you for that plug.
So I know this person says, I have read your books and am so moved by them. Thank you for being here and for sharing your time and experience. We are honored to have you with us tonight. My question is this: what do you fear and how have you overcome your fear?
Well, I don't know what I fear anymore. You want to foster a kind of a light grasp on life. It's interesting during the pandemic, especially in the last 2 weeks, I've had 6 funerals in the last 2 weeks, half from COVID and half from gang homicides, which shouldn't be surprising because if gang violence is about a lethal absence of hope, we're kind of in months and months and months of great despair. So that's certainly exacerbated, the violence level. And we've lost many beloved homies that everybody knew and loved. And so, I always talk about if death is the worst thing that can happen to you, then you will be toppled by life itself. And I think the mark of the Christian, anyway, is bravery and joy. And in scripture, it says in one way or another, do not be afraid. 365 times in scripture, so one for each day. And I had a friend of mine who had a mantra all the time where he would say it all day long during those interim moments, and he'd say, be fearless for me. And it was a kind of a prayer that tapped into bravery. And these are the marks. This is, you shall know they are Christian by their joy and their bravery. So I suppose what I fear is meeting payroll every 2 weeks. But other than that, I have kind of a light grasp on these things. You kind of have to, but it's part of my practice to not to cling, since that's the source of all suffering.
So we have some more questions, but I'm going to jump in and ask one myself. Several times it was mentioned and in the film that we saw at the beginning about tattoo removal. Can you, maybe this is common knowledge and I don't know, but why is tattoo removal such an important part of what you do at Homeboys?
Well, everything sort of evolved, and we would add things like therapy and case management and anger management classes, and it was all a response to something. And, gang members had alarming tattoos that certainly we knew would be obstacles to, employment somewhere down the line. And anyway, it's a long story how it all started, but now we have a tattoo removal clinic, and we have one paid physician assistant who removes the tattoos and 47 volunteer doctors who come in. And in the pandemic, it's been a hard thing to do because it's, it's close quarters of a clinic. But, I remember in the old days, we would have, and normally we do 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, tattoo removal. And we still have a waiting list of 1,000 people. But in the old days, it was less, it was more sporadic. And so we would just do neck and face, elbow down. And I remember a guy came in and he lifted up his shirt, and there was a huge tattoo on his chest, had the name of his gang. And it's a very painful, very long process. And I said, why just keep your shirt on, because no one will see it. And he looked at me and he said, my son will see it. And I said, okay. So removing a tattoo sends a message to friend and foe alike. It says, I have transformed my pain, so I don't have to transmit it anymore. And this is a new chapter for me. So it's a kind of psychologically significant moment for people. But we wouldn't have started it unless gang members asked for it. And it never would have happened if I thought, hey, this would be a good idea for you. And consequently, nobody's forced to remove their tattoos. It's like anything in recovery, it takes what it takes. So the moment they're ready to remove a tattoo, we do it.
You have alluded to this, but there's a question of what are your future plans for Homeboy? Do you have any specific goals?
Somebody asked me that yesterday. I always think I never give very good answers on this one, because I kind of want to stay anchored in the present moment. So I don't really, this can drive my board of directors crazy, but I suppose we're going to probably expand our campus and maybe add housing, which is really quite a need. But we also, we have a thing called the Global Homeboy Network. So there are 300 programs in the United States and outside the country that are modeled on Homeboy. So we gather every August for 3 days. All our partners come together and we share best practices and inspire each other. So there's Braveheart Industries in Glasgow, Scotland, that deals with returning citizens, and Rise Up Industries in San Diego that deals with felons and gang members. And so there are 300 programs like that all over. And it's sort of kind of a model, rather than airlift Homeboy into, Des Moines or something. We asked Des Moines to come here with stakeholders and just hang out and steal whatever you want to. And then they belong to our network of partners. And then they start their own thing in Wichita, Kansas, that has their own flavor, and it's born from below, and it's organic, as opposed to helicoptering in Homeboy Industries, which is what people asked in the early days. And we had to ask ourselves if we wanted to become the McDonald's of gang intervention programs, over 5 billion gang members served. So we decided not to do that.
And I'm guessing this may be coming from a student who says, do you offer summer internships?
Well, we don't really offer anything. We accept offers. We, at any given time pre-pandemic, we have 300 volunteers. So we've had any number of interns for summers and any other time. Well, people just come and make their case, and then we might assign them to a certain department: tattoo removal, legal, case management, or maybe it's just they cast their lot and bake bread with side by side with gang members. So it's whatever people will always say, what volunteers, what am I going to do here? And I always say, that's the wrong question. What will happen to you here? And that's the one you need to focus on.
Well, Father Boyle, we are coming close to the end of the hour, and we just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of what we know is a very busy schedule for you to spend a little time with us in Berea, Kentucky.
I am absolutely honored to have been with you.